Okay, so once again, great to see all of you. Let me go ahead and mute all just in case a few of you were not muted. So we've got that taken care of. So let's begin our Bible study tonight. It is entitled In the Last Days, which is a phrase that Paul uses in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. So that's what we're going to take a look at tonight to kind of give us a little bit of overall view of our discussion. We're going to center on the results of a recent Pew Research Center survey. Actually, the survey came out yesterday. So what I'm about to show you tonight is hot off the press. And it's on the decline of religion in the United States, the people's religious faith, people attending churches, people even claiming to be religious, is probably at the lowest level since the founding of the Republic. This used to be an incredibly religious nation, but it's only been since the 1960s that the stats started showing a decline in religious values and religious attendance in the United States. In the last decade, it's literally become a free fall, as you're going to see in a few minutes when we look at a few charts. So we're going to look at these results that came out yesterday from the Pew Research Center. And then we're going to look at this trend as it was prophesied by the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. So let's begin. This Pew Research Center survey on Tuesday released a number of results of the survey regarding religion in America. And here it's kind of a summation of what it had. It said, according to the findings, nuns, which refers to Americans who do not identify as having any religious affiliations, now make up around 29% of US adults, an uptick from 23% in 2016 and 19% in 2011, indicating, indicating that some Americans are beginning to lose interest in their faith. Some experts are estimating that unaffiliated people could be the largest religious group in the country. I want you to think about that. Here's what this survey says. Some experts are estimating that unaffiliated people could be the largest religious group in the country. And that is absolutely a new low that we have through our American culture. Here are some other comments from the Pew Research Center. Nearly 60% of the nuns say religion was at least somewhat important to their families when they were growing up, according to the AP NORC poll. So 60% of people who now identify as nuns grew up in religious families. Yet as adults, or by the time they became adults, they rejected religious faith and called themselves nuns. It's found that 30% of these nuns meditate and 26% pray privately at least a few times a month, while smaller numbers consult periodically with a religious or spiritual leader. Now, you could look at that two ways. One way to look at that is if you add those numbers up, 70% of the nuns make no effort. They make no effort to pray or meditate. They're just totally isolated from faith. Something else that came out in this survey. It says over recent years, the prevalence of the nuns in the US has been roughly comparable to Western Europe, but overall, Americans remain more religious with higher rates of daily prayer and belief in God as described in the Bible. According to a 2018 Pew survey, about 2/3 of US Christians, that's those who claim to be Christian, pray daily compared to 6% in Britain and 9% in Germany. So compared to Britain and Germany, we would still be considered a religious nation, even though we now have so many people who declare themselves as not aligning with Catholic or Protestant or Jewish or any particular religious faith. Continuing, some other things you can pull out of this recent survey. There are people who do actually practice either in a particular faith tradition that we would recognize or in multiple faith traditions, said Santa Clara University researcher Elizabeth Drescher. They're not interested in either membership in those communities formally or in identifying as someone from that religion, end of quote. So she's describing these nuns who are out there doing their own thing. And yeah, they might have put up a Christmas tree, for example, in their front window, and they might be in a particular faith tradition, but they're not interested in being Christian. They're not interested in formally being a part of any religious community. Continuing, it said the growth of the nuns in the US has become largely at the expense of the Protestant population in the US. According to the new Pew survey, it said 40% of US adults are Protestants now, down from 50% a decade ago. I want you to think how profound that is. A decade ago, Protestants were a majority of what was considered the Christian population in the United States. It has now fallen to 40%, 10 percentage point decline in just 10 years. Another thing that is said in this article is self-identified Christians make up 63% of the US population in 2021, down from 75% a decade ago. So 75% a decade ago would have called themselves, yeah, I'm a Christian, and they would have said they were a Christian of some sort, of some type. That has fallen now to 63%. And that's when you add up Catholic, Protestant, virtually everything that would be within the broad spectrum of what you might call Christianity today. So let's take a look at a few charts. Here's one chart. These are all from the article. In the US, roughly 3 in 10 adults now are religiously unaffiliated. If you look at the left of the chart at the top, you will see that since 2007, Christianity, those US adults who identified with Christianity, has fallen from 78 to 63% since 2007. That is a remarkable collapse. That's a free fall over a very short period of time in history. Look at the percentage of those who declare no religion. It's grown from 2007 to 16%, all the way up to 29%, again, in that very short period of time. Other religions in the United States who identify with other religions, it stayed about the same, 5-6%. It really hasn't moved that much. So we can't say the decline is because so many more people have declared to become Hindus or have adopted Islam. We can't use that as an excuse or as an answer. The real difficulties you see here is the absolute collapse of people who identify themselves as Christians. So we can dig a little more deeper into the details. For example, here's another chart from this article. Within Christianity, recent declines concentrated in Protestantism. 2007, again, the majority of people, majority of US adults identified themselves as Protestant, 52% in 2007. It has literally fallen all the way down to 40%. Again, that is incredibly significant. When you look at the Catholic faith since 2007, it was 24%, in spite of pedophile priests and all the bad media they've gotten and hundreds of millions of dollars of payouts to victims of molestation and pedophilia. The Catholic Church has only declined from 24 to 21% since 2007. And again, highlighting what we saw on an earlier chart, there hasn't been much change in faiths such as Mormons. They're about the same, 2% over that period of time. So we can't say that there are alternative religions that have taken the place of this fall in Christianity. What's taken place are people who now declare themselves as none, as not affiliated with Protestant or Catholic or any type of religious faith. So we see here in this chart that Mormons and Orthodox Christians are about the same as they were going all the way back to 2007. All right, let's take a look at another chart here. This is another chart from their website, from the article. 4 in 10 US adults consider religion very important in their lives. But I want you to notice it's 41% now. Notice what it was in 2007. It was pretty good majority. It was 56% of adults said religion was important in their lives in 2007. It's fallen all the way down to just 4 out of 10, 41%. But what I find just striking again on this chart now is take a look at the light blue one. That's the one at the far left in the bottom. That's 16. These are the not, they say religion is not too important or not important at all for them. They have risen almost, well, more than, they have doubled since 2007, from 16% all the way up to 33%, more than doubled over this period of time. So these are really scary statistics. In no time in our history have we seen such dramatic declines in religiosity or spiritualism or religion in the United States of America. I mean, this has been going on in Europe for decades, and frankly, we're finally catching up to Europe. This has been going on in Canada for a while already. Now, this is all catching up in the United States. Here's another chart. Among US adults, 1 in 5 now describe their religion as nothing in particular. If you look at atheists from 2007, they've doubled, but only from 2% to 4%. Atheist is someone who does not believe there is a God. Agnostic, an agnostic is someone who says, I don't know. They don't know if there's a God or not. They're not atheistic. They're not dogmatic about saying there is no God. But on the other hand, they're not confident there is a God either. That's called being agnostic. They more than doubled a little bit from 2% in 2007 up to 5%. So that's a kind of a significant change. But look at nothing in particular. U.S. adults who no longer identify as Protestant, Catholic, or with any particular religious group, nothing in particular has gone from 12% to 20% since 2007. And then those who say there is, who are not affiliated and not religious at all, is now risen to 29. So, or the subtotal, I should say, of those who have no religion. The subtotal in 2021 of those who said they were atheist, agnostic, nothing in particular is now 29%. Again, a dramatic rise in 2007 when that was only 16%. So those were a few charts and just some statistics. It's obvious that there is a sharp and ongoing decline in religious values and religious observance in our modern culture. People will always cling to their family traditions. Most people that are putting up Christmas trees, they don't even look at a Christmas tree as religious. To them, it's secular. Santa Claus is secular. It's a cultural tradition. They don't really even view it from a religious perspective. There are some evangelicals that do, but I'm here to tell you that most people that are putting up their Christmas trees and celebrating Christmas this year, is evidenced by the statistics we saw, don't do it from a faith point of view. We're becoming a more secular nation, and it's certainly appropriate to call the United States a post-Christian nation by looking at the kinds of facts that we just did. Post meaning later than. So we're beyond being Christian. We've moved beyond that. We are no longer a Christian nation. As I stated earlier, let me go back to this slide if I can real quick, because I thought this was rather profound when it said some experts are estimating that unaffiliated people could be the largest religious group in the country. And I might add, as we just flash through these statistics we've seen, there is no indication that any of this is going to stop. There is no reason for any of this to stop. This nation has crossed a tipping point, and that is the result of the division that we have. It's the result of scandals from televangelists over decades, the result of Catholic pedophile priests, the result of the media pounding religion, religious values. So all of that has come to the point where we're beyond a tipping point in our culture today. And all of these things have serious consequences to a culture that's losing its religious values. You can see the effects of this loss of faith in our daily lives in virtually every way. We are less civil than we used to be. People are primarily living in many cases in fear for their lives, fear for their health, just fear and depression and discouragement is rampant within our culture today. And I'm sure a big part of that is how people have felt isolated due to the pandemic for the last couple of years. What we're experiencing today was prophesied to occur by the Apostle Paul. And tonight, I want to take these statistics that we looked at and look at Paul's prophetic writings in 2 Timothy and see that there's a warning for us today, because I want to tell you very honestly and very frankly that I am concerned with what I see going on in the Church of God among many people, and I'm even concerned with what I see going on in my own congregation with some attitudes and things that are being said and behaviors that are occurring within the Church of God. So I think this Bible study is very important tonight. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Here's what Paul wrote. He said, "But know this, that in the last days," and these truly are the last days, "perilous times will come." Now, I'll break down these verses in a little bit, but let's just read all 5 of these verses at one time here, and then we'll break them down. "But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers," using God's name in vain. It's so prominent on our media today and social media and the comments that I read from people. I'm just stunned at what has happened to our culture the last 20, 30 years ago. Things that are being said today would have never been considered acceptable. People would have absolutely been called out for the things that they say every day on social media. Disobedient to parents, unthankful. We live in an entitlement culture. Unholy. They respect nothing, either spiritual or physical. There's no respect of anyone or anything. Unloving, unforgiving, slanderers. I gave a sermon a few months ago on the pitfalls of slandering. Without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness. In other words, looking religious on the outside, maybe doing religious things to give the impression that they're religious and they respect God. So having a form of it, it's a facade, but denying its power, the power to transform our lives from carnal into spiritual. He says, and from such people, turn away. So let's look at these verses. Let's break them down a little bit and look at them a little more closely as part of our Bible study tonight. Verses 3, we'll begin in verse 1. He said, "But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come." This is the Greek word kalepos, and it comes from the Greek word, an idea of reducing one's strength. In other words, times are difficult. Times are dangerous. Times are furious. It's not like it used to be. There's a reducing of the stability that once existed. Rory Bible Note says this about this verse: "The whole period between the writing of this letter," it's defining latter days, I might add, last days, "the whole period between the writing of this letter and the Lord's return, as his return draws near, these characteristics will intensify." And it refers in the Rory Bible Notes to 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. So I want you to think about this. It says, in the last days, perilous times will come. Can you get more perilous than the first major virus outbreak that we call COVID, a pandemic, the first one in nearly 100 years that has encircled the earth already a number of times? So far, 800,000 Americans have died due to COVID. 5,340,866 worldwide have died of COVID. That was this morning. I'm sure if I went to that same website and looked at the statistics, I'm sure it would be different. It would be higher. And there's no end in sight. I heard in the news once again tonight as BJ and I were eating that they're coming to see that this is not going to end. They're hoping that maybe with immunity, maybe If it mutates enough, it won't be as deadly, and it'll be just considered a type of an annual flu. It'll be like the flu that just circles the earth occasionally. But this is not going away. And as Paul said, in these last days, perilous times will come. Perilous, like people being afraid, like people literally dying of something you can't see with the naked human eye. A terrible virus that has cost so many people their lives, and again, isn't going to be going away. So let's continue. He says in verse 2, for men, during these days and during these latter days, men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy. So people, because they are lovers of themselves, all restraints are gone, and raw, rank human nature runs wild. People just love material things. They're too far into themselves. They're proud, they're arrogant, they respect nothing. They don't respect God. They don't respect their fellow human beings. They've even broken all cultural norms. They're disobedient to their parents. They're entitled, and they have no concept of sacred, of respecting anything that's in sacred territory or has sacred importance. The translation, God's word for today, says people will be selfish and love money. They will brag, be arrogant, use abusive language. They will curse their parents, show no gratitude, have no respect for what is holy. Again, that's the translation, God's word. These are all characteristics of a culture that has become self-indulgent and self-absorbed. All restraints against narcissism and vanity have been removed. People are more interested in selfies and celebrity than relationship. Just look at the phrases that we use, ghosting and everything, focusing on people drawing attention or trying to avoid attention by being anonymous on the internet. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but it's all boiled down to people being vain, being proud, being disobedient, unthankful, and unholy. Relationships are broken. People primarily are dysfunctional. And any restraints that we had, any propriety that we had in our culture in the past has now been eroded. Verse 3, they're unloving, unforgiving, holding grudges, slanderers, a real problem in our culture, and unfortunately a problem in our church as well. Without self-control, brutal, despisers of good. Again, from the translation, God's word, and lack normal affection for their families. People are isolated. Families have been broken. I was telling my wife a few weeks ago, virtually every client that I have has broken families. Most of my clients in my consulting business are men and women who simply live together. It is rare for me to have a client with a man and a woman who literally are married to one another. They all have blended families. They all struggle with lots and lots of issues because normal affection has been destroyed. And that's unfortunately what divorce does to families. I'm a product of a family divorce growing up, so I understand this completely and totally. It destroys normal affection because children have to take sides. They are forced to take sides. Continuing, brutal, have no love for what is good. The word brutal here is from the Greek word anemeros, and it's a noun, and it means people are becoming savage. They're becoming untamed beasts. When you see some videos that are available, particularly on YouTube, where people become unwound in front of a camera, you realize that all restraints have been lifted. Raw, disgusting human nature is now recognized, praised, considered heroic. If you come out with some type of sexual deviancy or perversion, you're considered a hero for telling the world that you're a pervert or a deviant. Oh, what a great hero you're so courageous for saying that. That's the kind of society that we have that Paul prophesied in advance would occur. Verse 4, they're traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. They live for one goal, and that is to get more toys, with the idea that he who dies with the most toys wins. So people are extremely materialistic. They want money. They want the things that money can buy. They don't have time for God. They've chosen to be nuns, to fit into the nun category and not be religious and not demonstrate a faith. Verse 4 from the translation God's word, they will be traitors. They will be reckless and conceited. They will love pleasure rather than God. This Greek word for traitor is parotes, and it means the sense of giving yourself into the enemy's hands, being one who's a surrenderer, a betrayer. You know, you can define this in two different ways. From a secular definition, it would be betraying the nation that provided you with opportunities and freedoms unheard of in history, but it's never enough. The nation's bad. Why, mistakes were made. So therefore, we should tear everything apart and we should destroy our nation because mistakes were made in the past, in spite of the fact that the people saying, let's live a lifestyle in which the average person on planet Earth would cut off their right arm to trade places with them. We're told that the nation is bad. And again, that's a secular definition of traitors. In my lifetime, when you literally were in the military or outside of the military and were convicted of treason, you were executed. We haven't done that for a long, long time. We convict people of that all the time, and they simply get prison terms. And from a spiritual definition, a traitor is someone who's treacherous against God or his church. It may be someone who's in the church and they become treacherous and they turn against God or turn against the church. They become enemies of the faith. So again, these are the things that Paul said that we could expect to see during these latter days. Having a form of godliness, but denying its power, and from such people turn away. Getting back to one of the graphs that we saw a little earlier, it said 4 in 10 US adults consider religion very important in their lives. Well, I guess one could be positive and say, well, look, if you add up those who say religion is very important, or those who say religion is somewhat important in their lives, that equals 66%. That's a lot. But looking at it that way is a sham. First of all, let me explain to you from a carnal perspective what the term means somewhat. When someone says they're somewhat religious, here's what they really mean. What they mean is when that religion agrees with what they want, well, then it's good. When the agenda of the religion fits their agenda, well, then that's somewhat, that's good. But they're going to ignore the rest. The times when they don't agree with that religion or they don't agree with the agenda of that religion, then they're not going to practice that faith. So that's really what somewhat means. So on the outside, one could say, wow, the United States is still a very religious nation. Why, last week, all of the great politicians gathered in the National Cathedral, and it was on TV, and they looked so somber and so serious as they were at the funeral of Bob Dole. But you know, the next day they all went back to Congress and were lying again, slandering one another, exaggerating facts, pushing their own agenda. So again, there's a form of godliness. We like to think of ourselves as a godly nation because of our heritage, but there's no power there. There's no transformation. There's nothing great that's happening. We're a nation in decline, not a nation increasing in greatness. So let's put some of this together. Most of these negative qualities that we saw in this survey that Paul talked about have accelerated the past few decades, due primarily to one major thing, and one major connection ties all of this together. That is the introduction of social media. And here's why. social media is the democratization of media. Now, what does that mean? That sounds like a big word. What it means is that social media is now available to virtually everyone. This never occurred before in human civilization. Now, a 90-year-old grandma on her computer can get on Facebook or on some other group and make a comment that could theoretically be read by tens of millions of people. So almost every individual has a voice, and that little voice of that one person is an opinion that's amplified. And if it's what we call went viral, that thing that grandma stated could literally be seen by millions and millions of people. Not a week goes by that I don't hear or read about some little video that, quote, went viral. Some kid puked in his high chair. It's had 5 million views on YouTube. I mean, that's not unusual to see anymore because, again, of the democratization of the media. Everyone now has input. And because of that, or along with it, people feel protected. Why? They're anonymous behind their little laptop sitting in their dark basement. And they can comment on social media and they can say the most outlandish things and there are no consequences. They can say silly things. They can be judgmental, narcissistic. They can be offensive and they get away with it. Therefore, from the past, previous filters and what we would have considered right or wrong or acceptable communication, it's all gone. The result today is unfiltered, carnal communication. Now, everyone has a voice. Everyone feels like they have a voice and they can be heard. The end result of all of this is often crude and selfish and jerk-like behavior by people who feel so strong hiding behind a computer somewhere 1,000 miles away in their home. So this has all created an environment in which all respect and propriety has gone out the door, has literally gone out the window. And since social media is the democratization of media, it competes with the traditional media. What is traditional media? Well, traditional media is newspapers, television, and radio, the original types of media that existed before social media. In response, this traditional media has adopted some of the tactics and methods of online media providers. So newspapers went online. The traditional media, CNN, is going to have an online show and it's going to be more connected with online of watching CNN. That's something they have planned in the near future. So in order to survive, since traditional media is competing against social media, they have adopted some of their tactics. However, here's the real negative part. In order to compete with social media, which is like the wild, wild west out there, everybody's saying everything and anything they want, the traditional media has also adopted sensationalism as its news. Just listen to the headlines. It's become partisan. It's become politically driven. Unbiased news coverage has been replaced with news analysis and opinion coverage. Growing up, I had no idea, could have never told you whether Walter Cronkite was a Republican or a Democrat because he didn't let anyone know through his news reporting. He just reported the news. Now, and it doesn't matter what channel you go to, especially on cable, after 8 o'clock, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Fox, CNN, NBC, or any of the channels that are out there, they are all biased, analytical talking heads, bobbleheads, bloviating from 8 o'clock through the rest of the evening, giving their analysis of the news and their opinion of what the news is. See, this didn't occur 20, 30 years ago. This did not exist. The tradition of the news media actually had values. The news media actually had standards. Things were considered unacceptable by the media that today happens profoundly, without any barriers, without any consequences. So these are some of the changes that have occurred due to the powerful influence in social media, which changed everything and also changed our traditional media. And as God's people, we have to be very careful not to get deluded into thinking that it is biblical or acceptable to be like these people on TV, to be like the things you're reading on Facebook or seeing on YouTube or any particular groups that you're in. It is not acceptable to be arrogant, to be crude, rude, and highly opinionated, getting in people's faces with our opinions. And again, sadly, this is also happening in internet groups. I've emails people have sent me who are part of Church of God internet groups, and it's appalling what some people are saying and the accusations they make about masks or vaccines, and yet they dare call themselves Christians. I'm embarrassed to be associated with people like that. And these kinds of comments, these kinds of things being said, these slanders, these parroting what they saw on the news last night from a talking head is bleeding into our congregations and causing divisions in our congregations, and this needs to stop. Our standard is not social media. A Christian standard is not Fox News. A Christian standard is not CNN. A Christian standard is what we read about in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 22. I'm asking all of you to be leaders. Leaders stand up against a culture. They stand in the gap. They cling to Christian values as mentioned in Galatians 5:22. Others just act like everyone else. They just parrot what the world does, either to be accepted by the world or because they lack the character and the guts to stand for something. And brethren, I'm asking you to stand for something. I'm asking you to stand for and live by biblical principles and standards as reflected in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 22. And here it is. But the fruit of the Spirit is love. It's not hate. It's not arguing with people. It's not getting in someone's face. It's joy. It's not anger. It's not your face being contorted. It's not you being angry. It's peace. It's not contention. It's not arguing with somebody, trying to prove that you're right and they're wrong. It's long suffering. It's when you hear something that you don't agree with, you bite your tongue and you demonstrate long suffering. It's kindness, not rudeness, not cutting someone off in the middle of a sentence because you don't agree with what they just said. It's goodness. It's not focusing on negativity or evil. It's faithfulness. Faithfulness to following the example of Jesus Christ and living by the faith that we declare is ours through a belief in Christianity. Gentleness is not being rude to someone because we don't agree with them and calling them names and starting to use curse words. It's self-control. It's stopping ourselves before we say silly, stupid things. Stopping ourselves in the tracks. And if need be, walking away from a situation. Against these principles, there is no law. And for those who are how Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Christianity is a way of life. It's not a way of talk. It's a way of walk. And we need to do that, brethren. This, what we just read, is the Christian standard of thought and behavior. And this is contrary to the present media that we have in our world today. It's contrary to the communication ethics of the world, which are like the Wild West, which everyone's in everyone's face. All the talking heads are talking over each other. They're not even listening to each other. They're seeing who can raise their voice first or the loudest or come out with the first offensive word. Those are not our standards, brethren. I hope we can understand that and appreciate that. So what can we do? Again, we live in a ever-changing world, and I realize the negativity is all around us. And if we're not very careful, I mean careful, we can easily be pulled into the values and the thinking that this world has. We don't want to do that, including in the way that we talk to one another, in the way that we express our opinions. Everyone's entitled to an opinion, but it is unacceptable to get in someone's face and to create an argument over our opinion versus theirs. So what can we do? Well, let's make a commitment to lead. This means going against the tide. It means rejecting what everyone else does, rejecting what the media does, rejecting the way social media is today. The prophet Ezekiel was inspired to write. God said, "So I sought a man among them who would make a wall, just build a wall, and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found no one." Brethren, are we willing to stand in the gap and maintain the values of Jesus Christ? Or do we want to be just like everyone else? Jesus said himself in Luke chapter 18 and verse 8, he says, "Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? Will there be any faithful really left? Or will they all have betrayed as traitors their calling, and they just became like everyone else?" What are our values? What exactly, brethren, do we stand for? Another thing we can do is make a commitment to follow the examples of Jesus Christ and the Apostle Paul. Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 1, "Imitate me just as I also imitate Christ." So rather than imitate the news media, what some clown said on CNN or Fox News last night, rather than imitate politicians or celebrities or athletes, we should be following the example of the individual who penned the book of Philemon. You want to see what great communication is, what tact is, how to handle a difficult situation in a masterful way and show class? That's evident in Paul's letter, the book of Philemon. Let's follow the example of that man who penned the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians 5. And Paul didn't have this philosophy, do as I say, don't do as I do. Paul believed and he lived by the fruit of the Spirit. Jesus said, "Follow me," 13 times in the Gospels. He used these two simple words, "follow me," to call Peter, Andrew, James, and John as his disciples. Think about what little he said when he was in an inquisition, when they were beating him, slapping him in the face, jamming a crown of thorns on him, dragging him out to drive nails through his hands and feet. Did he get angry? Did he argue with people? Did he have to give everyone his point of view? No, he didn't do that at all. And that's the kind of example that we, brethren, should be following. Something else we can do is refuse to engage in any negativity. Some of us are acting this way because we're spending too much time allowing garbage to enter our heads. Instead of doing things that are productive, we're spending too much time listening to imbeciles tell us what they think. We should refuse to engage in any negativity. If something is beginning to bother you on social media, on a cable news channel, do yourself a favor, turn it off. If you're in a conversation with someone and it's getting heated and someone is in your face, someone is saying things that are inappropriate, walk away if you need to. Say, "I'm sorry, this discussion is over." Turn around and walk away. Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 3, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, But wait, let me tell you what I think. Let me give you my opinion on this. Here's what I know. No, that's not what Paul's saying. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or your conceit, but in lowliness of mind, in humility, let's esteem the other person better than ourselves. If we're arguing with someone, we're not esteeming them very highly. If we're in someone's face with our opinion, we don't esteem them better than ourselves. We don't even respect them, let alone esteem them. Verse 4, let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Look out and make sure that we're not offending others by the things that we say and the things that we do, that we're giving people space, that we're respecting what they say, even if we don't agree with it. We're hearing them out. We're being good, active listeners. Those are Christian principles. As the Rary Bible note says, to be united, they must put away selfishness, personal vanity, haughtiness, and self-interests. Very wise advice from the Rary Bible notes. Well, brethren, that's the end of the Bible study tonight. I didn't mean to come on probably as strong as I've come across, but this is very serious. I don't see, and I've talked about this, I've mentioned it briefly in a few sermons, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse, including in our very own beloved congregation. And I am very, very concerned. So again, I apologize if I came on too strong this evening, but these are things that need to be said. And sometimes a pastor's job is to say some hard things, to say some strong things for the sake of his congregation when he sees things are going awry. And that's what I've tried to do here this evening. So it was not my intention to be overly harsh, but I hope we got the point across. And I hope to begin to see real improvement in our communications and our mutual respect for one another in the future. Leave politics outside the door. Leave our opinions on things that don't require our opinions outside that church door. And let's certainly not bring them inside and poison the environment of God's people with our own interest, with our own ambition, with our own conceit, and hurt the church of God in the process. So that's the Bible study for tonight. Are there any questions?